have now, and we are both going to make brief remarks. Our purpose for being here today is to announce that we are going to support the Debt Commission report and encourage its adoption by Congress. As we state in our announcement, our debt crisis is a threat not just to our way of life, but to our national survival. And the threat that we face is so real and so close that we do not have further time for gridlock or inaction. It's necessary that we take strong, aggressive action now. In the near future, if we take no action, we could see a collapse in the value of the dollar, hyperinflation, or other consequences that would force Congress and this country to incur consequences and to take actions that are far more serious and far more painful than anything in this proposal, as painful as some of the provisions in this proposal are. I want to talk for just a moment about what our current circumstance is. We agreed at the beginning of the deliberations of the Debt Commission to use CBO numbers. If you do that, you'd note that the debt of our nation has risen from 32% of our GDP just about 8 or 9 years ago to 62% today. And the alarming thing is that if we continue on our current policies, that debt will begin to skyrocket. It is projected, if we do not change our course, to hit approximately 90% in 2020 and grow as high as 180% by 2035. It probably will never hit that, because if we don't take decisive action, then the economy will. And we will see the kinds of forced consequences that will change those dynamics in very, very painful, difficult, and damaging ways to every American. The reason that we're supporting this plan is because although it is not everything we wanted, and although it contains things that frankly are painful to us and are raise heartburn, it does take us dramatically down the path in the right directions toward addressing these issues. First and foremost, it addresses the spending issue. Under the proposal, there will be definite hard caps on spending put into place. And to just quickly summarize, it will result in us returning to 2008 spending levels by 2013 and reaching a balance in our budget by 2035. But if you look at those debt numbers, it will stop that skyrocketing debt that I just talked about, and actually by 2035 return our ratios down to 41% of GDP. Still not adequate or necessary, but far different and far better than what we would see if we take no action. And I think equally as important, and one of the most beneficial parts of this plan, in my opinion, is that it doesn't only focus on tax policy, but it also focuses on revenue policy, and does so in a way that does not continue our debate in Congress and in this country over whether we should raise tax rates or reduce tax rates, but instead engages us in tax reform. If we are going to strengthen our nation and preserve the American dream for our people, we need to have a strong, robust economy. Yet if you look at our current tax code, I'm not sure you could construct one that is more complex, more unfair, more costly to comply with, and frankly, as anti-competitive to our own businesses as our current tax code. And we expect that the reforms that are proposed in this plan, which are some of the most dramatic and extensive reforms that I've seen in my lifetime, to changing our tax code, will help us to move to a more fair, a less complex, a less costly, and a more competitive tax code that will generate a stronger, more robust, and more dynamic economy. And one of the other beneficial parts of this is that in using the CBO numbers, we have not projected the dynamic impact of that kind of tax reform on our revenue. In other words, if there is a dynamic impact, and we're both confident there will be, that additional revenue as a result of a stronger economy is locked in by this plan to be utilized for either further rate reduction or further debt reduction, and is barred from being utilized to justify additional spending relief. It's these kinds of measures, among many others, that cause me to be ready to support this plan. Like I said at the outset, there is much in this plan with which I have problem. but there is a necessity that we move forward. And this plan will get us on the way. As we bring this plan before Congress, I'm sure there will be need to adjust and to add to it. There are significant things missing from the plan that need to be included. But as we debate about whether to add or adjust to this proposal, we must get started. I'll end as I started, by saying that the time for divisiveness, for gridlock, and delay has ended. We must take decisive action now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. The best quote I've heard so far about this plan is the only thing worse than being for it is being against it, from Kent Conrad. And I think it's really accurate. It says a whole lot. I'm not typically a worrier, but I can tell you right now, I'm significantly worried about our short-term future, not our long-term future. I think we're in a precarious balance. I think we're at a day of reckoning. And it doesn't matter what your political party is or what your philosophical bent is. This is a starting point, and that's all it is. It's a starting point. More will have to be done. There will not be one American that is not called on to sacrifice if we are to get out of the hole that we're in. The time for action is now. The threat is real. It's urgent. We cannot wait for another election. We cannot wait until we get more of what we want. There's more in this plan that I dislike than I like, but the urgency requires me to put aside anything other than my constitutional obligation to try to get the federal government reined in to the realm and size and intent that it was originated upon. This bill does not cut spending near enough. We've documented to the press multiple times over $350 billion a year in wasteful spending, duplicative spending, fraud. We didn't get there. We got 200 plus billion. We need to get more. The tax rates aren't flat enough. They need to be flatter if we really want a robust economy and use both growth and common sense to get out of the problems that we're in. The challenge is a matter of national survival. That does not understate the case. If you look at history, no republic has survived as long as we have. And they have all failed. And they've all failed for the same reason. They lost control of their fiscal policies long before they ever were conquered. We see it today in our weakness in our foreign policy. We see it today in our weakness to finance our way and get out of the tremendous recession that we've been in. All those are having detrimental impacts on not only our kids and grandkids, but us as well. The good news is there's not a problem in front of us that we cannot solve. The question is will we take off our particular hats and work in the best interest of America to cure the real problems that ail us? We'll take your questions. Thank you.
Senators, what does it mean to support this if you're also going to be changing it and voting for more spending cuts or less tax cuts in Congress? I thought that the whole idea was it was a package.
Well, it's a beginning. You pass this package, then you do more. This package does not solve our problems. It only cuts $4 trillion. We need to cut 10. And we need to grow the economy. And flattening the rates further, lessening the duplicate programs. You know, the real essence in terms of looking at America, individual initiative and self-reliance has been replaced in all too many instances by dependency and reliance upon government. And the thing that built the country was that self-reliance and individual initiative and individual responsibility. And we have to get back to that if we're to succeed.
And let me just add to what Tom said and make an exclamation point on it. This plan is a package, and it does come as a package. But it is not the end. It is the beginning of the significant steps that we must take. And I believe every member of the Commission recognizes that additional steps will be needed And Tom and I are already committed on a number of those that we believe are necessary to continue advocating for them.
Senator Coburn, or Crapo, what do you say to the anti-tax zealots in your party like Grover Norquist, who have already come out with their predictable statements and seem to be driving a lot of opinion over across the way in this building? What do you say in response to that?
Well, the first thing I'd say is our obligation is to the country as a whole, not to any special interest group. Number two is I don't think we break that pledge at all with this bill, at all. It may in a cursory look at the letter that we do, but if you look at, we're at about 92% tax reduction versus tax increase, and if you score that dynamically, we're going to get more tax reduction than you have tax increase. So I don't believe we're in there. And if we're in there, so was Ronald Reagan, because this tax plan is Reagan on steroids that was passed in 1986.
And just two quick additions to that. You always, in every aspect of this plan, you have to look at what is coming if we do not take action. If we do not take action, the tax increases that this Congress will face and probably have to pass are far greater than any kind of arguable tax increase in this bill. And secondly, we have put provisions in here, as I mentioned earlier, that if there is a dynamic impact on the economy, which we're confident there will be, and a strong one, that the revenue generated from that is to be used for further rate reduction and for further debt reduction, which will all address those issues. And I totally agree with Tom that this does not break that pledge in any way.
This is a floor, just to make sure everybody understands, this is the starting point. If we pass this bill tomorrow, it doesn't get us out of the woods. Everybody needs to understand that. It does not get us out of the woods. There are many more difficult choices that this country is going to have to make. We're going to have to do something with Medicare. It's impossible. It can't. The health care, one of the objections to this plan is it doesn't address the health care costs. And because there's a political reason why it can't, because we just had a bill passed that nobody was going to go for on the other side. But the fact is we're going to have to come back. And we're going to have something like Paul Ryan's roadmap, or something else innovative if we're to achieve any semblance of stability financially in this country. So this is the beginning. This is the start. It's not the end.
Senator, can you talk about the provisions in the plan that you think might be the most politically difficult for members of your party to accept?
No, I probably can't. It's not a day for politics. We don't have that luxury anymore. America needs to understand there's not a luxury for politics anymore. It is time for us to get our act together. We're really at war. We're on three fronts now: Iraq, Afghanistan, and the financial tsunami that is facing us. And we need to bind together without a hat, without a philosophy, and say, what do we do to fix our country? And I said in my opening statement, it's going to come a lot quicker than anybody in this room thinks. All you have to do is watch what's happened in Europe, and we're not far away.
You mentioned Mr. Ryan. He also mentioned concerns for health care. This morning he's indicated he's going to vote against specifically for those concerns over the lack of health care cutting. Any reaction to that?
Well, he's an independent member of the commission. He gets to vote the way he wants. I believe we're going to have to address that anyway, and I believe this is the first step. I will tell you, we have to start somewhere. And it can't be all my way. I would have written a totally different plan. I would have eliminated the income tax completely, and we'd gone to a national sales tax. And we wouldn't be a Medicare tax, and there wouldn't be a Social Security tax. We wouldn't have done this at all. I can't have my way. But our country deserves us to sacrifice, like the call we're going to make to everybody else to sacrifice, to accomplish what we have to accomplish. And that is to get out of this hole.
Senator, have you talked to Senator McConnell about this proposal, or any of your other Republican fellow senators?
I certainly have. I've talked to Senator Crapo, and I've talked to several other Senator Republicans.
What's the prospect of other Republicans in the Senate supporting
I'm not
this?
very good at predicting how things will pass. I'm pretty good at predicting things that won't.
I would say in response to that, we both have talked to, I think, most of the members of our conference and of the other conference as well, the Democratic conference as well, many of them. And I would say that at this point, other than the members of the commission who are starting to now express their position on the report, most of the other members of, I think, both caucuses are reserving judgment and studying right now. And my initial observations are that just like every other member of the commission, they are seeing pain and they are seeing gain in the proposal.
Let me ask you a question. Most of you know me. What would cause me to move from multiple principal positions over the last 6 years to accomplish what we need to accomplish? Do you think I'm fearful of what's getting ready to happen to us? I am scared to death at the potential that could unwind this country far greater than anything we've ever seen before and far sooner than anybody imagines. And we have to send a signal to the international financial community. Look at Great Britain. They came in, they put in an austerity budget. What's happening to the growth? They're starting to do this already. Austerity works. And so we're going to drive more austerity. I can promise you over the next 6 years, I'm going to drive austerity like crazy because our kids and grandkids are worth it.
Senator, let me tell us a little bit about the process. When President Obama created this commission in February, a lot of people thought it would be very political because there's 12 lawmakers on it. I think a lot of people are surprised it's gotten so much bipartisan support. Can you, you guys obviously spent a lot of time working through the details of this. Can you tell us how this played out and how you got to this point?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that first. At the outset, I was very dubious, like many people in the country were. And I have to give credit to the 6 non-congressional nominees or members of the commission who came in and in a nonpartisan way addressed this issue and helped the members of the commission who are from the Senate or the House achieve that bipartisan approach. Now, the members of the commission and from the Congress were also hopeful that we could do this. But having that 6 set of members who were not voting members of Congress, in my opinion, actually helped significantly to move us in the direction of discussion that could get us here. One of the early things I think that happened was, as you'll recall, at the outset there was a concern that this commission might be a vehicle to create another huge taxing engine on top of the income tax in this country. And one of the early things that I think we were helped to achieve there was an understanding that that would not be helpful to solving this problem, and that in fact a major reform and overhaul of our tax policy to help us become more competitive globally would be the better step for the commission to take. And it's those kinds of developments in the deliberations that I believe helped us then to move to this point.
Well, and I also would say, I think the members of the commission understand the severity of what we face. And failing to recognize that, and if the Congress doesn't recognize that in this next year, no matter whether it's this plan or some other plan, if we don't act, we have shortened the timeline under which we will have an opportunity to act, number one, and the consequences will grow daily that we will all suffer as Americans if we don't act.
Just in terms of looking ahead, there's still an uphill climb, it looks like, to get to 14. So the White House said yesterday they're looking at this possibly to evaluate for proposals for their budget submission. Ryan mentioned he thought there were things in there worth copying and borrowing for next year. What do you guys see as the core elements or principles that if this plan doesn't get sent to Congress this year, that should be carried over into a framework for next year?
Well, first of all, I'm hopeful that we do get to 14, and I don't think that it's out of the question yet. If we don't get to 14, nothing stops us as a country, whether it be through presidential initiative or through congressional initiative, from considering all of the provisions and proposals in this plan or pieces of them. And I'm actually confident that that will happen in one way or another. I'm hopeful that we can create a very strong dynamic that, as Tom says, will cause Congress to act. Because for the very reasons that he's said, I agree, we do not have time to delay. In addition, though, I believe that the core elements that we must focus on are, as I said at the outset, the spending controls. I'm a strong advocate of caps with very strong enforcement mechanisms to make sure that Congress is put on a glide path that it cannot get off of without extremely strong margins. Secondly, I believe that putting that spending restraint in control and in place, and then putting the enforcement process in place to keep Congress on that spending path, we also need to address the second key big element, which is to make our tax code more competitive and reform it in a way that will give us a much stronger and more dynamic opportunity for economic growth. Those two pieces, I think, are the core pieces that we've got to keep focusing on.
Senator, do you think that this plan should get an up or down vote in the Senate, regardless of whether it gets the 14?
Sure,
I'd like to see
yes,
that.
I'd like
yes.
to see it.
Practically speaking, if it does get 14, is there time to draft and score legislation based on these proposals? I mean, could there be even practically speaking a vote?
You mean
on this?
before December 31st?
Yeah, it won't happen.
During the lame
We-
duck.
But the co-chairs have gotten assurance from leadership in the House and the Senate that they will allow that process to go forward in the near future in the new Congress.
So the votes would be sometime early next year.
Do you mean assurance from John Boehner?
I can't tell you that I know they did from Harry Reid. I don't have any idea whether they did from Boehner.
And I'm confident that if we have the votes, that the congressional leadership on both sides, in both Congresses, this Congress and the next Congress, would give us the opportunity.
Senator Coburn, you know President Obama pretty well. Can you tell us if you talked to him about the deficit issue, and do you think he's pretty committed to these things that you guys have tackled?
I have not talked to him in about 5 weeks or 6 weeks, so and we've not discussed this. But you know, this is his commission. I voted against this process. I think we have a commission, but the commission of the Congress has failed to act, as we've seen just this week. We ought to be acting on it, and so he set it up. It's his commission. It's his report. It's what his commissioners gave him. And now we're going to be above a majority. So I think it sends a signal. It's their potato now.
Can you talk about the tax cut extensions? How does that fit in with the deficit?
That's now. But the point is and what are the tax cut extensions about? It's about not hurting this very fragile recovery. And by the time this thing, if you took where we are in this and traded that, I think you'd see a more buoyant recovery if we put this reform to the tax rates, especially the corporate tax rates, into this in a way that will ultimately build greater revenues for the federal government, not through increased tax rates, but through increased size of the GDP.
And let me just make an observation on that. A number of the economists who reported to the Commission during our deliberations told us that one of the most important things that we could do, one of the biggest impacts we could have on our economic growth in this country would be to adopt a plan and give the world economy the confidence that America was going to reverse and correct its fiscal policy, whatever the concepts in the plan were. And so with regard to the tax question that you asked, I believe one of the important elements and one of the very positive elements of this plan is that if adopted, it would move us out of this debate about whether to raise taxes or lower taxes and on which category of people should taxes be raised or lowered, and instead would move us into a new dynamic of tax reform and how should our tax code look as we try to create the kind of code that would be, as I said earlier, more efficient, less complex, less costly to comply with, and more competitive. And so this plan literally changes the dynamic from the entire kind of discussion that we are having in Congress today over just rate levels.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.